In the lead up to Path of Exile 2's monumental closed beta, the developers are being active in the community and actually speaking to us again. If you haven't seen it yet, there is a brand new subreddit for Path of Exile 2, and the game director, I believe it's Jonathan Rogers, is on the subreddit actively answering questions of the community about Path of Exile 2. So, in this video, we are going to go through all those questions and answers as they stand today to make sure as many people as possible understand that Path of Exile 2 is not a cash grab, it's not a crap game that GGG is developing, it is the evolution of ARPGs, and GGG is pouring their heart and soul into the sequel to Path of Exile 1. So, without further ado, let's get right into the questions and answers from Jonathan. We are starting with a juicy one. How much of a focus will Path of Exile 2 have on alternative endgame systems such as Sanctum and Delve, or brand new ones? Jonathan responds, we will absolutely still have alternative endgame options. Some existing POE 1 leagues are being upgraded and reframed to allow them to be more endgame focused. Some of them work better than others for that, but maps are still going to be the central endgame mechanic for sure. That's very interesting to hear. That probably means Heist will be in PoE 2. I'm guessing that Sanctum will be in PoE 2, and 100% Delve is going to be in PoE 2. We've already seen that giant that we fight in the volcano sniffing in sulfite, so I think that Delve is going to make a return in this sequel. Another super good and interesting question here. Bosses giving perma-stat boosts, campaign only or maps as well? Jonathan responds in depth, and then he actually points out this person gave him kind of a revelation, which is super cool. I actually agree that it would be very taxing to have to kill every side area campaign boss every time you go through the campaign to complete your character. My current plan is that we have some number of permanent stat boosts through the campaign, but we rotate which bosses grant them each league so that it stays fresh. Each boss would still have an individual stat it boosts, which technically means that each league would have a different set of boosts available. But now that you mention it, since there are map versions of the majority of the bosses, we could make it so that you can get the stat boost reward from the map version of the boss as well as the campaign version. That way, if you miss it, you can grab it during maps instead. This is so awesome to hear. I love to see the insight into their thought process. This brings me back to all the research I've done about Path of Exile 1 for my flashback series. The developers used to communicate so heavily with the PoE community, and this insight is exactly what I'd like to see. All right, we've got another question here. Many people use the same hand for WASD and Flasks, and it is ideal to be able to do both of those things at the same time. As well, PoE 2 will have a larger focus on more abilities, putting keybind pressure there as well. Are there any plans to reduce the amount of flasks we have down from 5? Jonathan goes right in and answers the question. So we actually tried less flasks. For a long time it was 3 by default, and then you get 4 and then 5 as you upgrade your belt. But it just didn't feel as cool, so we just went back to always 5. I haven't found flasking with WASD to be particularly a problem, but that is also because we ended up removing mechanics on flasks that caused the flask piano gameplay. So of course that means there's not going to be flasks that increase your evasion rating, your armor, stuff like that. It's all going to be reactionary. I do think that we don't need the 5 flasks though, personally, but we'll have to see how it feels once we actually get into the game itself. An oh so beloved question about MTX share. I understand that PoE 1 and PoE 2 share MTX. Of course, I know that there are some things that are not shared, such as the Orb of Fusing MTX and Quicksilver Flask MTX. These items are not in PoE 2. But all armor MTX will be shared, right? So what does old armor MTX look like in PoE 2? Will the current old texture still apply to PoE 2? Or will those old MTXs get a texture improvement? Jonathan responds once again, goes super in depth, it's very cool. All the armor MTXs will work. During the beta, a lot of older armors, more than a few years old, will not be re-rigged yet though. We intend to get through the backlog during the closed beta, so by release they will all be working. It's quite a lot of work. Unfortunately, we can't really update how old armors work. There are multiple reasons. For one, we just don't have the time to do that. There are literally thousands of old microtransactions. And for two, Even if we did have time, I'm not sure it's even a good idea. What if a player doesn't like how it looks after changing it? They purchased something that looked a very specific way, we can't really change it out from under them. Great response here from Jonathan. That totally makes sense, the thought process behind it and the fact that they're not going to be changing the textures at all. That's super cool to know that all of our old challenge, or our new challenge armors are going to be working immediately in PoE 2. I cannot wait to wear them as soon as we get our hands on the game. Another interesting question about auras. Are auras gone in PoE 2? Jonathan responds, Jonathan actually responds to another person. Let's talk about what the other person said first. There are auras, they just didn't show them in Exile Con, but considering how Spirit is now the resource used to activate auras and how limited it seemed to be, since a single effect like Herald of Ash reserved all your base Spirit, it's probably going to be very hard to fit auras in our builds in PoE 2 because we will have to choose between auras, heralds, or trigger gems to make our skill combos easier to use. Jonathan responds to this comment and says, "You are basically correct, but I'm hoping we can get the balance right so that auras are a competitive choice with other reservation options. The auras swap in and out when doing weapon swap, so that means that they may be more easily integrated into a build than you might think. Obviously, they are going to be most useful for party or minion play since the whole design of an aura is the ability to buff others, but we always try to find ways to make you be able to use things in different ways. The Templar will need to have some interesting ways to use auras. It's in theme for him, and we want Flail or Scepter to be a viable build option." Super interesting to hear from Jonathan that auras are going to change quite a bit in PoE 2, and I'm kind of curious to see if we're going to have that meta of stacking as many auras as possible. Again, even though that's probably not what they're intending here, I know they probably didn't intend it in PoE 1 either. Another question here, item filter support in PoE 2. Essentially, will they be making a first party item filter? Jonathan responds, I really hope this is Jonathan and not Mark Rogers. I don't know if it's Mark or Jonathan. I'm gonna go with Jonathan though. Jonathan responds, I kind of have the opinion that a website is honestly a better interface for trade than what we'd be able to do in game. I just have a feeling that even if we put the trade interface in game, people would still prefer the web version. So this is actually a response to somebody else talking about trade in the game too. There's also something about the item filter right here. Here it is. I don't think we will get time to write a first-party filter editor, unfortunately. Not against the idea, but it's just not something that we have time for right now. Very interesting. They already have the community doing it for them, and they're doing it so well. Thank you, Neversink. They probably just are not prioritizing currently. They're prioritizing making the entire game. The person follows up and says, greatly appreciate the response. When you do, please allow item label styles to be edited independently so skilled artists can collaborate with filter creators. How much was spent improving what's displayed in PoE 2? How much on the thing that covers it up? Celebrate your loot. It's best in class. Jonathan responds and says, the main reason we have loot labels turned off is because the balance isn't finished. We actually have quite a lot of improvements in that area. We don't want people to see it half finished and assume that what they see in the demos is what it will finally be. Oh, are you saying what's present in the demos isn't actually what's going to be happening there? Very interesting, Jonathan. Okay, here's another question. Will automation/triggers be a meaningful part of the game in the late stages? Jonathan responds and says, I want automation to be a part of the game that any player can engage with. It's fun to set up automated things. The capabilities of automation in PoE 2 are much higher. I also want it to be possible to make a build that is fully automated, but at the cost of efficiency. The Spirit system does allow for this. You can sacrifice defense for Spirit by using a Scepter instead of a shield. Or you can sacrifice damage for Spirit by allocating Spirit nodes on the tree instead of damage. But we just have to be very careful. You don't want the endgame to always be automation all the time. I think the sweet spot is where the most optimal builds will include a little automation, but you still need to respond to combat actively a lot of the time. Interesting response. We do know that they are pushing for people to be using multiple skills and buttons while they're playing PoE. They have all these various combinations that were showcased in the Mercenary where you can launch grenades and then blow them up with your actual shots. Wild stuff. So this is no surprise, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it actually plays out in the live game in June. Interesting question and interesting response from Jonathan. Will players be able to enter the closed beta in June? Somebody says, if there's a threshold, then I'm good. Probably near $5,000 spent over the past 7-8 years. Jonathan says, you are certainly getting in. So it does look like the closed beta will be based on how much you have spent on PoE 1 in the past. Interesting stuff. All right, we have one final question about a league mechanic that has always been in POE, at least since, I started playing and way back when the game was super young, and that is strong boxes. Strong boxes feel like one of the most dated mechanics in POE. Will they get a redesign in POE 2? Jonathan responds and says, all content we port over to POE 2 is going to get a major revamp. It's not just a matter of dropping the POE 1 stuff in and going, sweet, job done. I agree that strong boxes could use some love. Okay, there we have it. Strong boxes will be in POE 2. You heard it here first on Talkative Try. That was it. Some new information about POE 2 finally dropped, and the best part, it's coming directly from the source, from Jonathan or Mark themselves. They're talking to the community. They're on the subreddit again. This is something that I have dearly missed ever since I started playing. It used to be where Bex or Chris or other developers would get on the subreddit, talk to the community, collaborate, say where they're failing, say where they can improve, be very candid with us. It does seem, at least for now, while the Path of Exile 2 subreddit is small and the community is tiny and not as enraged as the POE 1 community, there is that level of communication. And it's incredibly exciting to see. I hope they continue this. If you have any questions, hop on over to the POE 2 subreddit, start asking them. The developers are currently talking with us. Make sure you're kind, make sure you're respectful, and make sure you understand that these people are extremely passionate about this game. They are looking to make the next evolution of ARPGs. They're not trying to make a sequel just to Path of Exile 1. Of course, they're going to load a ton of the content from POE 1, a ton of the lessons, a ton of the mechanics into POE 2, but they're also trying to push the genre forward and push their company forward into this new era. They're going to continue innovating in POE 1 and in POE 2. I mean, in POE 1, they're innovating how MTX is done. The Valdo's puzzle box, adding your own tier 17 map into the game if you pay $480 and designing it to be as wild and rewarding as possible. That's awesome. That's seriously awesome and way better than just filling a cosmetic shop with tons of armor skins and stuff. Path of Exile does that, and they take it a whole level above. And it's super exciting. I can't wait to see what Grinding Gear Games has in store for us for POE 2 and, of course, Path of Exile 1, because Affliction League rocks. And I have upgraded my Cleave of Rage build, and it's doing so well. It's so exciting. It's so good. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more Path of Exile 1 and 2 content, make sure you give it a thumbs up for the algorithm and subscribe, because we are so close to 10,000 subscribers. It's crazy exciting. Thank you for the tremendous support. Anyways, that's all for this video. Tala Moana, Exile.